Hello, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss in Internet Shitlords. And as you can see, I'm not filming from my regular place, either of my regular places right now. And things are a bit messy. I had to move around some stuff. And anyway, so forgive me that, and forgive the fact that I'm not doing it in landscape, which I know it for some reason annoys some people. I don't understand that. I mean, because does that really matter? Because I mean, there's no action going on. It's just me filming, pointing at a cover of one of my books, you know. But okay, whatever. First off, I wanted to comment that some very good news. We are now over 5,000 subscribers, which means that at some point relatively soon, I'm going to be doing a 5,000 subscriber live stream. It might be next weekend. We'll have to see about that. It could be a little tricky because it might end up clashing with inappropriate characters, which is coming up on, I believe, the 5th of June. So we're gonna see how we do that. And anyways, I will let everyone know well in advance, so that people will be informed. You know, if and when I'm going to be holding it. When I'm going to be holding it, because I'm definitely going to be having the live stream. And I don't know if it'll have a topic yet, or if it'll just be, you know, questions and answers with my fans. But anyways, thank you to everybody who has subscribed. I'm really happy about that. And if you haven't already, then please hit the subscribe button and share my videos so we get more subscribers too. All right. Second, well, my topic of the day. Today I have decided to answer a question that somebody had asked me at one point, probably quite a while ago now, because I've got this in my notes of possible topics, that is quite old, about how is the best way to incorporate or when you're creating a setting to incorporate ancient history of the setting in your game. And this is a very good question, actually, because I think you're going to find that in a lot of RPG books, like setting type books, there tends to be, and I don't understand why people do this, there tends to be very large sections that detail the history of the setting, which makes sense, but they do it in such a way that it gives equal weight to the very, very, very old history and to the immediate past, and it doesn't seem to there isn't a coordinated effort to create context of utility, right? So there some books are especially bad at this, where they might dedicate pages and pages to events that supposedly happened in their setting 10,000 years ago, right? Unless your setting has a time machine, that's not important, you know, except really maximal level things might be important from that. But it should be a tiny amount of stuff. Do you know how much stuff we actually have as information from 10,000 years ago in our real world? Almost nothing, right? And that's with our advanced technology, you know, so if you're looking at a medieval setting, how much they knew about what was going on 10,000 years ago would be practically meaningless. And it'd be meaningless to the people living there. So the important thing about how to use, because you do want to have a history in your game, and your history should affect your present. History very much affects any culture that one is in, right? But how important what you include should depend on a couple of things. One is obviously potentially adventure seeds, right? But the other one, and this is the one that people miss out on, is how significant is the event to things going on right now in the setting. And so that means that there should be a lot more very recent history rather than really, really ancient history. Because obviously what's happened in the last couple of generations in the setting is very, very important to what would be happening in the setting now. It would explain a lot of the stuff. You know, you have to understand the context. You know, if you're talking about the War of the Roses, you have to understand the context of the 100 Years' War, you know, that happened that was happening just before that. If you want to understand kind of the situation of Mad King Henry, you have to know about his father, Henry the great king that won the Battle of Agincourt, and so those things are relevant. So make sure that it doesn't mean that every single thing that you have in your history is something that is still happening today, or that it's going to be immediately applicable to adventure. But what it should do is it should explain your world in the present moment in a better way and in a useful way, right? So always focus on the more recent history, and then the further back you go into the past, the more monumental the event has to be, right? Like, you don't want to go into a bunch of detail about stuff that nobody in the setting that's a useful tip, by the way. If nobody in your actual game setting is capable of remembering something that happened in the past, don't include it. I mean, unless there's like some big secret of the campaign or something, unless it's like directly relevant to like the bad guy of your campaign or something like that. But if not, it doesn't matter, right? Because if no one remembers it and it's not going to come up in an important way, then all you're doing there is creating lore that is for the probably for the author, right? Like, more than anything else. In fact, a lot of that stuff, it's like the author trying to be really clever. Now, if something can be imposing, if there can be a significance to what's going on in the present, then yes, then it can be included, right? So you could talk about, in a historical sort of campaign, again, the War of the Roses setting or something, you could briefly mention the Roman Empire and the fall of Rome, and then, the Dark Ages, right? But, very, very overview type stuff, You could mention William the Conqueror, because that's, that explains the aristocracy of the present day in the War of the Roses, that they're not the native Gauls or Celts. They're not the Saxons. They are a different group that showed up a lot later, and that's why there's a connection to France and all of that stuff, So those are the things that can be kind of important to do it. And then there's also the question of how do you make good history? My number one tip would be take history from a real life source, right? Like, look at a real history of somewhere and use that as your inspiration, because it's very difficult to simulate history. The thing you absolutely do not want to do under any circumstance is to write history as though it was a novel, like an exciting literary novel with a beginning, a middle, and end, a protagonist and antagonist, climaxes and denouements and all that sort of stuff. Like you were writing a novel. Because that is the least realistic thing in the world, right? No history goes like a novel. History does have epic moments of adventure, of drama, of what have you, but the difference between the novel and real history is that the novel appears to be designed by the hand of an intelligent creator, right? It's telling a story. Unless you've got like one of these very postmodern novels that start out of nowhere and end at a random moment and have no real plot. But other than those, like the traditional novel has a beginning, a middle, and end. It has protagonist and antagonist. It has a conflict. It has a climax. It has a resolution. So all of that, when you're looking at it, it's obvious that there is an intelligent design, right? In a history, you don't have that. In history, you have great spanning events, right? You have like these incredible conflicts, right? The Saladin wins at the Battle of Hattin, and to bring up stuff that you're going to be able to read about in the history in Sword and Caravan. 1186, I think it was, Saladin defeats the kingdom of Jerusalem, the Battle of Hattin, takes over Jerusalem and almost all of the kingdom of Jerusalem. The Pope, when he hears about it, drops dead from shock. The next Pope calls for a great crusade. And who answers the call? Richard the Lionhearted, and then he goes along having a bunch of adventures on the way from England or France. I don't remember if he set sail from France or from England. I think it was from England. And has a bunch of adventures along the way, including stuff to do with like Excalibur. He conquers two different kingdoms along the way just for shits and giggles, and then he ends up landing on the beach, during the middle of the siege of Acre. He jumps out of the beach, grabs his battle axe, and kills a half dozen men as he's getting off the boat, So it's like, that's epic, right? It's really epic. But, then what happens? Well, they fight. Richard Lionheart ends up beating Saladin. Saladin's forced to make a peace, but Richard has the tragedy that he looks over at Jerusalem. He can see it from where he is standing, but he won't be able to get there because his allies, didn't come together and unite with him to do the final step to recapture Jerusalem. And so he leaves. And then as soon as he leaves, he ends up getting captured by the Holy Roman Empire, by the Germans, who imprison him and force him to pay a tremendous ransom. And Saladin dies, very shortly after that, and so it doesn't end with a resolution that is a movie finish. It ends with, it was a really amazing set of things that happened, but then, this goes on, and then Saladin just dies at random, and he dies of a disease, and then his sons start taking over. There's other stuff that happens, and so it all just keeps going, And I think that's one of the key differences. If you want your history to seem realistic, you have to have those rando moments, right? There might be this epic thing going on, and then suddenly the king drops dead because he, got dysentery or something. Or, again, Richard Lionheart, he was still young when he died. He died a few years later, and he died from infection or toxicity from a crossbow bolt that hit him at random in the shoulder that was fired by a 14-year-old boy, right? It wasn't there was absolutely nothing epic about the way that Richard I dies, right? So you want to create a history that is, that has that organic feeling. And the only real ways to do that are either blatantly rip off a historical period in the real world, possibly one that, you want your setting to kind of be based off. There's elements of that in Game of Thrones, right? In Game of Thrones, George R.R. Martin borrows very liberally from British history, including the actual timeline of Game of Thrones at the present is basically the War of the Roses, and the war, the Targaryen War, the one that they're going to make the new series about. Let's see if that's any good. But anyways, that period, that war, civil war within the Targaryens, is actually just the anarchy, right? Which is a civil war in England that happened 200 years before the War of the Roses. So Martin knows that trick. He knows how to make the reason that there are parts of that in some ways Westeros feels more realistic than other fantasy settings is specifically, there are ways in which it's not realistic, like how big the continent of Westeros is. It's freaking the size of South America, and then people seem to teleport back and forth, right? But in terms of the history, it's like it has this feel that it feels more authentic, right? And the reason for that is that he blatantly ripped off British, English history in particular. That's one way to do it. The only other way to do it is, think up a timeline. Let's say you've got a series of events that you want to have, a series of kingdoms, the idea of how they develop, and then when you're getting to the nitty gritty of what went on in the recent period, have your plan, but kind of play it out, event by event, and along the way roll some kind of a random die to determine moments when unexpected things happen, right? And then switch your history around that way, right? So have people suddenly die, have someone, get sick, or have, other events taking place, natural disasters, other things like that. And then ask yourself, well, how does that change my timeline? And so design it organically, because if you do that, then it'll have elements that will seem more realistic. Maybe someday I'll do some mechanics for random historical events. I kind of do have that in Lion and Dragon. No, sorry. In Dark Albion, I have random events that happen when you arrive in a city, right? And I do that. I'm going to be having that same table modified, obviously, to fit the new setting in Sword and Caravan, right? So that's a part of what gives you a sense of a living world. The player characters, if they're coming into a place and there's some event going on, there's something happening, right? It might be a big one or it might be a small event. And then later they leave, and then when if they ever come back to that city, there's another check, right? So then other things will have changed while they were gone. And so just like you want your present time to have that element of things going on besides some kind of a divine inspired plot. You need random checks for that. You also need in your history to have a history that has random elements that ruin it from being a proper novel. If you want to write a historical novel, just go and write a historical novel, right? But if you're designing a setting for an RPG and you want that setting to feel authentic, then don't write your history as if it was a novel. I guess that's everything for today. Anyways, if you like this video, please share it anywhere that you can. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. And if you want to support me and have me continue doing videos, whether they're informative videos like this one, or rants, or reviews, there'll be more reviews coming up pretty soon, then you can support me. And I mean, you could support me by just throwing money at my Patreon, but I would only say that you should do that if you either have already bought all my books, or all the ones you want, or you have no interest in buying RPG books, but you want to support me anyways. Well, great. Okay, put money in my Patreon. But if not, check out all my products: Lion and Dragon, Dark Albion, Arrows of Indra, Star Adventurer, Cults of Chaos, World of the Last Sun, the Old School Companion 1 and 2, and all of my RPG Pundit Presents series. So even if you only have a few bucks, you can check out any of the 106 issues of RPG Pundit Presents. It's like you're buying me a coffee, but you're getting something in return, you know? So check all those out. I'm sure you'll find something you'll like if you're a role player at all. You're going to find something there. So, and you know, if not, well then sure, send me money on Patreon, or even just direct by PayPal, whatever you like. But thank you very much for listening. Currently smoking. Where is that? Oh, there you go. Oh, that's too close. Lorenzetti Poker plus our Argento Natural.